Bloomfield, who also wears the hat as our emergency manager. And it is being put on at the request of Commissioner Warren to kind of maybe do a deeper presentation on emergency management in the Emergency Operations Center. We touched on that when we had the training for the commission orientation. But given where we are with the storm and the threat this weekend, I think this work session is very timely. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Bloomfield.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, City Administrator Johnson. And I think Commissioner Warren must have saw, like, did you see this coming, or is that what this is? So just going to do some brief overviews, and then we'll talk about roles and responsibilities, and we'll kind of go through all the meat and potatoes of emergency management in the EOC. So basically, the EOC was built in 2015. That's when we opened it. It's a 10,000 square foot facility. It is Category 5 hurricane rated. It has a 10,000 gallon fuel tank with a 1,000 gallon day tank. We can run the entire operation of the city from that building. We have all the capabilities to do that. We do have 2 conference rooms out there. One is the mayor's conference room. We have a media room downstairs where we have done a lot of interviews over the last 5 years. And we also have one upstairs where we've done a lot of the interviews as well. We also have offices for the mayor and a city administrator out there. And recently, in the last 2 years, we've put a backup dispatch center for police. So normally our police, whenever they go to a backup dispatch center, they go to Palm Beach Gardens to Northcom. We can actually run Northcom now from our EOC. It's actually the backup for the entire northern part of the county. So basically, a quick overview of emergency operations and emergency management. These are just a small list of all the things that we would basically ramp up for. Any type of medical emergencies that include large-scale incidents, big vehicle accidents, any major fires, especially brush fires, big hazmat releases, technical rescues. The big one, of course, is natural and man-made disaster response. We're going to kind of get into that a little bit later about like what we have done in the last 5 years, the ones that we have responded to. And I think that everybody knows that we had are still having a pandemic. And of course, now we're getting some other things that are happening. So what do we do? The biggest thing that we do in emergency management is the prevention, mitigation, response, and recovery from all major incidents. So what does that mean? Prevention means mitigation. Or what are we mitigating? Are we mitigating the seawall? Are we mitigating floods? Are we mitigating sea level rise? A litany of these things. We actually did a hazard and vulnerability assessment that we completed in 2019 that outlined those things, and we actually started doing mitigation projects based on that hazard and vulnerability assessment. When we talk about response, that's the first 72 hours after a major incident, whether it be a storm, whether it be a bad vehicle accident, an MCI, a mass casualty incident, some type of mass shooting. These are things that we respond to. Recovery is the long haul. And I know we have some finance people in the room, so they know about this, but we could take up to a decade to recover from an event. So whenever, for instance, hurricanes are one of the big ones. Whenever we're talking about, you get audits, so you submit the paperwork, you get audits, you submit more paperwork, you get audits, so it takes a long time to get that money back from whenever your response and mitigation part of this. We're working on grants right now, and I'm part of several different grant committees. Right now, we're doing an infrastructure committee where we're looking at the infrastructure money that's coming down from the federal government to start hardening some things like seawalls and pump stations and flooding and all of these things that we're trying to mitigate. Resiliency, of course, falls under, making our city a more resilient city. So that means making our buildings LEED certified, getting more EV vehicles, just planting more trees, being more resilient, and then mitigation. So the mitigation is like hardening. We're hardening a lot of our buildings, and for instance, we got an FDEO grant for 2 of the fire stations, and what that does is it hardens those buildings from, say, a Category 2 building to a Category 3 or 4 building. Same thing with some of the other mitigation projects that we're currently working on. We're continually adding things to the project prioritization list, which is through the LMS, Loss Mitigation Strategy for the county, and then we get monies from, we can go and get money from the state and federal government under those mitigation grants. We're also part of the cybersecurity team for the city. We help develop policies. We work with the IT department on different classes and different trainings that are coming in. And of course, anytime we have any issues like we did with the payroll system, you know, we are part of that and how we're going to respond and recover from that. Continuity of operations plan, it's kind of like one of my babies. It's something that I brought to the city a couple years ago, and there was a big need for it, and we're still working on that. We have a lot of the infrastructure built out on it. We have a lot of green check boxes, but we're still working on that. We still have departments that are still adding to it constantly, but it's a really good source. If we had, for instance, the issue that we had with the payroll system, they could literally go to the continuity of operations plan. Anybody could see that there's a function, an outline for what to do if that was to happen, and then follow the directions given in that continuity of operations plan. We have done 20 grant-funded FEMA classes in the last 3 years in the EOC. This includes operations section chief, planning section chief, finance section chief, all of the FEMA classes that we can bring in, and they were all grant-funded at 100% through the Assistance to Firefighter grant. We also sit, I also sit on the county and city LMS, which is Loss Mitigation Strategy, and the Hazard and Vulnerability Assessment. I'm the chair for the county for that. And what those two do are the Loss Mitigation Strategy and HVA. They help us build out a mitigation for the future, how we're going to mitigate and make the city better, and how we're going to, like for storm response, for sea level rise, for all of these things, and how we're going to respond and recover from those. So those are all part of that. And then, of course, the Public Safety IT Governance Board that we sit on, and that helps with what IT projects we're going to bring forward in the next 5 to 10 years for public safety. Am I going too fast? Any questions? Okay, good. I tend to talk a little fast, so if you need me to slow down, please tell me, especially when I drink a lot of coffee and over the weekend, you know, not a lot of sleep. So. Not because I was partying, it's because we had a storm out there. I just want to clarify that. So here's a continuation of what we do. We're getting ready to embark on a citywide threat assessment. It's something that we do about every 3 years. We actually started one in 2019, and then of course we got the pandemic, and we had to quickly shift into that. But basically I'm working with Assistant Chief Tamika West with the PD, and Tim Scott with Risk and the IT department, and what we do is we go around to, I don't know why I did that. We go around to every building in the city, and we start to figure out what threats there are, and then how we can mitigate those. So with cameras, can we lock doors? If we had a mass shooting in a building, how would we respond to it? These are things that we're working on now. It's going to be about a 2-year project, 2 to 3 year project, and of course, as soon as we get done with it, we got to start it over again. So, but it's a really good, in my opinion, we started here at City Hall in 2019. We went over to the complex, and that's about as far as we got before the pandemic hit. So we did make some changes in both of those buildings, as well as the EOC. We found that there were some holes in the EOC, and we fixed those. And that goes back to the Chrono swipe system and the cameras in there. In 2022, we completed the CEMP, which is a comprehensive emergency plan for the city. We have to update that every 5 years. It went to the commission, and you guys approved it. Thank you for that. That basically is an overview for the emergency plan for the city. If we have something, how are we going to respond? How are we going to recover from it? And that's all built out into that CEMP. On top of that, we have hazard-specific plans that are part of that as an annex. So, for instance, if we had a hurricane that's getting ready to come ashore, we have a hazard-specific plan for that response. We also, one of the other things that I did that I'm pretty proud of is we started building out a GIS post-damage assessment for critical infrastructure. So basically what happens is after a storm clears or a major incident clears, we can go out and we can look at these critical infrastructures or other infrastructures in the city, and we can build out a post-damage assessment plan for it. Is the building 50% collapse? Is it a complete collapse? Do we need to send USAR out there? And we actually have boards in the EOC where we track this live data that comes in. And as it comes in, it builds out a whole dashboard with color-coded so that we can see it, and we can start sending different types of either FP&L or fire units or police units to those areas. We do incident action plans for every major, I say major, anything that has more than 100 people at an event, we build out an incident action plan for. And that way, if we have to respond to that, everybody can be on the same page for that event. We actually build those out in WebEOC in the county's database. So if we had something major happen at Sunfest, a baseball game, boat show, they actually already have our incident action plan in hand, and they can start moving other pieces around in the county to help us with that response. One of the other things that falls under my purview is I'm the PIO for the fire department. I also do internal communications for the fire department, and my lieutenant does social media for the fire department. So it's if you have looked at our social media lately, we have started ramping up again now that I don't want to say we're out of the pandemic, but now that we have started to ramp down from the pandemic, we're starting to do some of those other functions again. And then, of course, citywide full-scale exercises. We haven't done one since 2020, and that's all because of the pandemic, and we just didn't want to have people in a tight area during the pandemic. We will start ramping those up again in November. So we talk about activation levels. We are currently at a level 3. However, normally on a day-to-day basis, we're at a level 4. That means that we're basically doing paperwork, we're building incident action plans. Those are the kinds of things we're doing on a 4. On a level 3, which we're at right now, we're keeping an eye on what's going on out in the Gulf. We're in National Weather Service meetings. We're at state meetings. We're basically in meetings constantly throughout the day from 8:30 a.m. till 5, depending on what meetings are going on. We happen to sit on like 4 meetings a day right now, which is the National Weather Service, the state meeting, the ES 4 and 9, which is fire and USAR response, and then we have another meeting in the afternoon, which is another National Weather Service meeting. Level 2 is a partial activation, which is what we would go to if the storm gets any closer and moves any further east. We would go to a level 2, which means we would start bringing in the section chiefs, which is the planning section, operations section, finance, and logistics section. And what we start doing is we start ramping up operations, getting parts and pieces to where they need to go, start staging things, that kind of stuff. Level 1 activation is a full activation. That means we have basically roughly 20 people at the EOC that are running full operations. We have IT, GIS, on top of the section chiefs. The mayor will be there, possibly the city administrator, and we start running full-scale operations from the EOC. So the comprehensive emergency plan, which we talked about a little bit earlier, it basically is a framework to ensure that the entire city is adequately prepared for any of the life-threatening emergencies that we may face. So that's basically the entire CEMP in a nutshell. And I believe that we gave you guys a copy of it before you voted on it, so you should have a hard copy. There also is a virtual copy under Lotus Notes. There's actually an EM icon under Lotus Notes, and the CEMP and all the hazard-specific plans are there in that area. One of the other things I talked about, and I can't stress enough, is the mitigation and resiliency. You know, we work with sustainability, with infrastructure on these things. We are constantly working on hardening and mitigation projects. One of the biggest ones we're working on right now is the seawall. It's broken up into several sections. We've got multiple grants out there for it. On top of the pumping stations, we have over 130 pumping stations throughout that pump waste and water. And we also have some of the other areas that we're working on for the seawall. Hazard and vulnerability assessment we completed in 2019. We're actually looking at going back out and doing another one because we're now 3 years out. We should be doing about every 5 years. So we're now looking at consultants through grant funding to try to go do another hazard and vulnerability assessment. And then, of course, the infrastructure and grants and mitigation for sustainability, which we talked on. And if you look right down there, that's sunny day flooding on this picture right here. That's a Flagler Drive, and we're working on different mitigation projects for just those type of things. It's almost like it was meant to be. I put this picture, just so everybody knows, I put this picture in here 4 days ago, before the storm was even close. But this basically is Hurricane Irma. So if you look in the last 5 years, here's some of the things that we've had to deal with. And Assistant City Administrator Fana called me a good luck charm this morning, and I think, as you see, I'm not so much a good luck charm. So we've had four tropical systems in the last 5 years. We've had plenty of debris management based on some of those storms. Irma, we called that Storm Treemageddon because we had so many trees down in the city, and we were out there for days cutting them. We had protests last year in May. Those ran for a couple months, and we had it where they we had protesters shut down I-95, which we had to deal with. We had, at one point in the EOC, we had the FBI and Secret Service, FHP, other police agencies. We had basically a full staff in the EOC for about a month of weekends for that. And of course, we in the last 5 years, we had former President Trump, who lives at Mar-a-Lago, 6 months out of the year, every single weekend he was here. And he was, when he left PBIA, he was ours, and I say that, the city's, until he left, because we respond to all hazmat, technical rescue, and any other calls that go over at Mar-a-Lago. They're basically our response, other than initial fire response from Palm Beach, but we basically go over there for that. I've been to multiple hazmat calls over there, even after he was no longer president. We had that drinking water issue last year with the blue-green algae, which we had to stand up a pod for 5 days. We passed out over 300,000 bottles of water for that during the pod. And several of you came out to that, so you saw the operation and saw what that was like. And then we do 130 special events every year, including some of the big ones: Sunfest, Boat Show, Moonfest, baseball, so on and so forth. Those take, like right now, we've already started planning for the marathon. We had our first marathon meeting a week ago. So we planned 3 or 4 months out. We're already in planning stages. We'll be planning for the boat show coming up in about a month or two. So we start planning those out long before they actually happen. We start doing meetings. We start building incident action plans. We start PD, fire, emergency management. We all meet. We talk about what we're going to do just in case. And then we build out the plans for that. And then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. So just some pictures of the last 5 years. Upper left-hand corner. Here is the cameras inside the EOC. You can see that was from the marathon. The picture just below that was from the vaccine depot that we put at out there at Gaines Park. Sorry. And then, of course, this was from the protests, the water response over there, and then Sunfest. And as you can see, we've been pretty busy the last 5 years. This was kind of a big one for us because it had never been done before, and I think it worked out extremely well in conjunction. Of course, this is my biased opinion, but I think it worked out extremely well, and every commissioner took on one of these responsibilities, and I think it worked out. I couldn't be happier with it, put it that way. And no one had ever done it before. And I actually have a lot of municipalities reaching out to me now asking me about this program. So we can actually make this program, we called it a COVID response unit. However, we can break this down into any community response unit. So whether it be a hurricane, whether it be the pandemic, or whatever litany of responses we go to, we can break this out and we can start building it with elected officials, public and private, and nonprofits. So if you look at these, we had for COVID, and like I said, we can turn these into anything if we had a hurricane come through, which is housing and homeless, economic support, seniors, children and families, food, water, and medicine, community services and volunteers, nonprofits, and faith-based outreach. So basically, as a commissioner, you would be in charge of one of these. You would work with private, public, and nonprofit people in their different sectors, and you guys would develop plans on how to do what's best for the city in regards to these functions. Like I said, I think when we did it at the beginning of COVID, we just had such a great response from the community about this. So I'm just very happy and proud of this unit.
Success.
Yeah. So talk about hurricane categories. Here's the different categories for you. As you can see, a Category 1, not so bad. You get a little windy. Category 2, a little bit more windy. Category 3 starts to get really windy. And then, of course, a Cat 5. And, of course, I'm being a little levity on that. But basically, these are the different categories, and we'll start breaking them down a little bit. But
Chief,
Yep.
can you
Yes.
tell us who was the genius behind the pictures?
Yes. Yeah, I found those on LinkedIn, and I just thought that was just when I saw them, I couldn't stop laughing. It summed up the categories so well. And because category 5 is, of course, raining cats and dogs.
Think of a storm in the same manner.
That's right. So a category 1 or 2, this is the kind of damage that we can suspect. We're going to have trees down. We're going to have blocked roadways. We're going to, some of them become more of a rain event than a wind event, of course. That's probably what we're going to be dealing with over the next couple of days. We're going to be dealing with a lot of rain. We're only going to have a 35 to 45% chance of getting tropical storm force winds on the current path over the next 2 days. However, we're probably going to be seeing up to 8 or 9 inches of rain. So we just have to deal with that.
We need it.
Yeah, and we need it. So there you go. And that's, because we are under moderate drought conditions right now too. So 8 inches of rain would actually do us pretty good. Category 3, we're talking about a little bit stronger storm. We're talking about now, roofs being ripped off. We're talking about some, higher level destruction. You're definitely going to get some power poles down. We're talking about a strong wind event at this point. And then, of course, the category 4 or 5, these, this is what I tell everybody. Category 1, 2, and 3, we have plans in place. I think we could easily respond to those, and we would do a really good job at it. When you're getting to a category 4 and a 5, a strong 4 and a 5, and I can tell you from being up at the Panhandle when Michael came in, I don't ever want to do that again. That was horrific. And when you see the devastation after a category 5, it's just, on the picture on the right, you'll see the trees with the leaves. That's how you know how many leaves are left on a tree. That's how you know how strong that is. That happens to be at Hurricane Michael, and there wasn't a leaf left on a tree. It was crazy. So you're talking wide level destruction at that point. And I just hope that we don't get one of those ever. So to kind of discuss the hurricane alerting system and what you are to expect looking out, a watch basically is either for a tropical storm or hurricane, it's 48 hours out. That means you will start feeling those effects 48 hours before landfall. So it doesn't mean that you're going to get the eye of the storm in 48 hours. It means you're going to start feeling effects from the storm in 48 hours. And then of course, a warning is now 36 hours. That's when you're going to start feeling those effects within 36 hours, whether it be tropical storm or hurricane. And then during the event, when we don't like to tell what the wind speed is, but whenever we get to a certain wind speed, we won't go out anymore. And what I mean by that is police and fire, public safety, we don't go out anymore. And that's one of the things that we preach when we talk about A, B, C, D, when we're talking about evacuation zones. If we tell you to evacuate and you don't, and the wind speed picks up and you get stuck, there's a good chance we're not coming, because we're not going to put our people's lives at danger in those kind of environments if we've already told you to evacuate. Have we went out in storms? Yes, but we make sure that we're as safe as possible when doing that. With that, we also so when a storm clears, we start sending out our police and fire and our post-damage assessment teams, because we need to get what's going on out there as fast as we can so that we can start sending resources to those areas as quickly as possible. And then the PIO and communications, they're in charge of getting information out via Everbridge. It's the same system that the county uses, and basically it's a reverse 911 system, and we can get information to all the residents in the city via cell phone, via landline, via text message, and also via email. So we want to kind of touch on our employee emergency hotline and their designations. So we have an ABC designation for our employees. A means you're going to be coming to work. That's police, fire, that's some like public works, utilities. We are going to have teams that are going to be coming to work during the storm, and as soon as the storm clears, they're going to go to work. So basically, they're going to start clearing drains so that we can get the water off the streets. They're going to start cutting trees. They're going to start emergency response, and then, like I said before, post-damage assessment. And then B is basically you're going to report to work in the response and recovery phase. So if we need you to come to work within the first 72 hours, the directors will basically tell you, okay, you're a B employee. We're going to expect you to be at work, whether you're a call taker, whether we expect you to go out and cut trees, you're a B employee. And then C is if we need you to report to work, depending on the storm. Like I said before, category 1, 2, or even 3 storm, we probably won't bring a lot of C employees in. But if we have a stronger storm, we're going to need all hands on deck, and we're going to expect everyone to show up for work. And then department directors, they have they have the A, B, and C employees. They keep track of that, and they will let their people know about when to come in and how to come in. We also have a phone tree that we established, and then every department has their own established of how they're going to speak to their employees or how they're going to communicate to their employees, because we have some people that don't have email or text message, or they don't really want to. So what they'll do is they'll figure out a way to get communication to those employees, whether it's, hey, after the storm clears, you need to call into the hotline, or, excuse me, after the storm clears, there is a meeting spot we're going to meet at, and all of you need to show up. So what are our expectations? Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Questions at the end, or can we
whenever you can ask them, sure.
I just had two. One, what's our tree, and what letter are we?
So basically what we expect of the commissioners is that you stay in your district and you become the link for your district to the EOC, and we have a liaison, either be City Administrator Johnson or she'll have a designee, and we will feed information. What we did during the pandemic is we actually had a call. I think it was every day at like 11 a.m. we had a call. And basically what happened is we would just fill you in on information that you could get back to your constituents. And then the same thing goes the other way. If something's going on in your district that we need to know about, through the liaison, let us know, and that way we can handle that. We don't expect the commissioners to come in to work. We expect you to stay in your districts and basically be that voice for us in your district. Okay, so the biggest thing is, are you personally ready? Do you have your food and water and your medication situated? Do you have your stuff ready to go so that whenever the storm comes and it clears, we can have you ready to go to work in your district? Once again, be the line of communication. That's the most important thing, I think, for commissioners, is being that link, that line of communication to people out there, because very similar to Michael, we didn't have a line of communication. We didn't have phone service. We didn't have, it was very difficult to get information out. But the best way to do it is if you're a commissioner, we don't have that line of communication. We can't, send out text messages. We can't send out phone calls to the residents. We'll give you the information, and then you can basically, however you decide to do it, whether you have a meeting, you're able to, or you go out and talk to, because there's always these people in your districts, right, that are kind of the mouthpiece for the districts. And if you can get information to them, they will get it to everyone. That's kind of almost the old school smoke signal. Like, we had to almost go to that at Hurricane Michael, where we had liaisons that had to go in and get information and bring it out. And that's what we expect of you. And whether we got to come and meet with you personally, if I got to send liaisons to you to get information or send you information, we'll do that. Make sure to just stay informed. One of the biggest things is the state of emergency declarations. Just make sure you know what those are. Like right now, we are under a state of emergency from the state. We have not declared yet for the city, but if we do, just make sure that you're aware of that declaration and when it started. And then, one of the other big ones that we usually deal with is the curfews. We always deal with the curfews, are always a big one, and that's something that we would expect that you would be able to get to your constituents, is make sure to follow that curfew. And then the relay of information, which we just talked about. And I'm ready for questions and comments if you have them.
Thank you so much. I have one question. I was walking out of my house today, and I live right in front of what used to be Macy's, and it's now a building, being in the process of being built. And as I walk through the city, we have road projects, we have a lot of buildings. Is there a contingency plan? How do we, what do we tell them to do in this case in terms of wrapping up the buildings, making sure things are secure, making sure things are not blowing, in the neighborhood? I'm just curious if that's something that you handle, or is that something the city is responsible for?
Yeah, so we actually, building services, they actually have connections with all of those construction companies, and we do mandate that they basically pick up, like, if there's stuff that's going to blow around, like a pile of bricks or something like that, they got to clean that up, and we make sure that they know that. The cranes, the sky cranes, during, and I'm sorry, one of the storms, I think it was Irma, we made sure that we went out and talked to them directly and let them know, like, hey, are these cranes going to be an issue? What storm ratings are they? These are all things that we do deal with right before the storm comes.
Great, thank you. Additional questions? Commissioner Ward?
You mentioned the grants, and thank you for this, by the way, because I didn't realize how much you guys were involved in also resiliency and mitigation of that. Now, do you guys have your own grant writer, or are you working with the new position at the city level with grant writing? How does that work?
So up until we got the grant writer, Chief Maddie and I wrote grants for the fire department and EM.
That's impressive. All right, awesome. So she's going to be helping you guys.
Yeah, so we basically, like, for the infrastructure grant committee, yeah, we start looking at those grants, and then what we have, the committee comes up with how we're going to move forward with the grants. And actually,
just real quick, we also have, is this on? We also get consultants that help us out as well at times. So it depends on the type of grant.
Okay.
yep.
Commissioner Peduzzi.
Thank you, Chief, for this presentation. It's always good to make sure that we're all on the same page, especially when we have hurricanes out there and in times of emergency. One of the questions that I have is that I know that the police department had a representative within the EOC as a full-time representative prior to Assistant Chief Mooney leaving. Do we have someone like that in-house now full-time? And if not, do we have something else to make sure that the police departments, that their interests are also represented?
Yeah, so Assistant Chief Tamika West has taken over that role. So she, like, over the weekend, I was sending her information. She was on some of the webinars with me. So yeah, she's basically taken that role over.
Thank you.
Commissioner Warren.
I thought I'd let everyone else go first because I have several questions. You spoke about flooding hazards and evacuation zones. Do we know what those evacuation zones are?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we do, and they are actually, we push people to Palm Beach County DART. That is actually an app, but you can also go to our website under hurricane, and you'll see the zones. And then there's also the county has their website for evacuation zones. But Palm Beach County DART is probably the best way because it's a quick, easy app that you can go to, and you just hit evacuation zones, and it'll show you actually where your zones are. You can also go to the FEMA flood website. If you type your address in on FEMA floodplain, it will actually tell you what zone you're in.
Excellent. And when you spoke about essential employees, and we can identify that some of those essential employees may be in the areas where we can anticipate flooding or that it could possibly be in an evacuation zone. And you spoke about A, B, and C. In the event that we need to activate A, B, and C, do we anticipate, or is there a place that they would be able to go to where it is stable and where their shelter is secure, instead of anticipating that they would have access to be able to come into work if roadways are closed?
Yeah, so there's several different ones. So we do house people at the fire stations. All fire stations are housings for some of the more essential employees like police and fire, and then also, like, say, for utility at the waters plant, they have a Category 5 building there that they will actually go to if they need to. So we have plans in place. One of the other things that we look at is we have some agreements with some local hotels. Like, if we had to put people up inside the city, if we were worried about them be able to get back or not, we have blocks of hotel rooms that we looked at to put those people in.
Chief, just to add, we also pre-position vehicles too.
Correct.
It's as important as the people sometimes are the vehicles and being able to get access to
Yeah, so we just had a meeting on Thursday with Public Works and Public Utilities, because we start our planning phase, even when if we're anywhere near a cone, we already start planning. We've learned that, being, hit or almost hit by multiple storms in the last couple of years, I don't want to say we've gotten better. I don't want to say that we're where we need like 100%, but we have gotten much better. So one of the things that we do is we start looking for areas that we can start housing vehicles, start housing equipment, those kind of things.
Okay. After Andrew, I wanted one of those car boat vehicles because it was
yeah.
just really
Yeah.
crazy.
Yep.
The text messages and the communication, and I'm saying all of this having gone through. I was a member of EOC, and I was a safety officer for a hospital, and communication was very important. And we get comfortable thinking that we have access to all of the things that are our creature comforts now, and we know that we won't necessarily. And if we are liaisons and expected to be able to relay information, receive information, to relay information, I'd like a world phone.
Like a sat
Light
phone?
phone. I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
But
Well, so there's different.
budget's done.
So we actually do have sat phones in the EOC, which we do. We strategically place with personnel. And like I said before, if we lost communication, and I learned, and I will say, every time I get deployed or every time we have something, I learn something. And one of the things I learned from Michael, the biggest thing that I learned was we didn't have communications. We had none. For a 20 by 40 mile swath, we had no communications, nothing. Even AT&T FirstNet, which we carried those phones with us, we had very sporadic, which they tout them, these things will work anywhere. Well, they didn't because it was just so massive, the hurricane, and we weren't prepared. We weren't as prepared for it as I think we will be in the future. However, what we did was we started sending out liaisons, and they would do face-to-face, and then they would come back and they would report if they got to an area where there was comms where they could actually use the phone, or they would just come all the way back and they would report. So that's kind of the plan that we have as well. If we had we'd lost communications, we would have one or two people, and they would just make a loop, and they would come and see you guys, and they would basically get information, give information, and they'd come back to the EOC. If they have a phone they can use, they do that. If not, they'll come back to the EOC and they'll report, and we'll do it all over again. And we would set up times. We do have plans in place for that.
Can I add on to that last question, just since it's appropriate right now? I just wanted to share with my colleagues that during the last storm event that we had, I was concerned with District 4 because we're so far out from some of our resources. And I went to the EOC, I went to Chief Bloomfield and told him my concerns. And they outfitted me with everything I needed to feel comfortable to be able to communicate. I got an EOC radio, and I felt like then that we were now connected. So they do a tremendous job. If you have an issue, just go to them and say, hey, this is what I'm concerned about, and they will make sure that I think your concerns are addressed. And then the other thing is we also had access to the emergency phone system, I think, through cellular. Mm-hmm. So and hopefully that program is still in place, that they will give you instructions in an app that you will get priority over all other cell service if in a time of an emergency.
That's correct. Yeah, what we do is we just basically take all of the phone numbers, and we have an emergency app that we push those into, and then you get frontline service for those.
excellent. That is excellent. I have another question. We've seen different things that have affected our payroll, and I heard you mention that, and I don't know if who may be the right person to answer this, but if we recognize that storms are imminent and that it's during a time of a pay cycle, and that there can be issues with electricity or phones or things like that, when would we activate like an advanced pay drop or something so that our employees wouldn't be struggling and trying to figure out how they would do whatever they need to do in the event of an emergency and we're not able to get their payroll processed?
So I'll have to defer that one.
Jose Luis Rodriguez, Assistant City Administrator. Under our continuity of operations plan, we have different scenarios that we plan for. So depending on the communications availability, we have the ability, if there is communications, to handle the payroll process remotely from any location at the city, including the EOC. If you're in a situation where you don't have that ability to get the payout electronically, We have backup ways of printing checks if we need to, and we would have to establish, obviously, kind of like we do pods for water, it would be pods for employees to get their paychecks, but all of that is evaluated against the bigger backdrop of how feasible is it? Because if you're in a situation where, you know, God forbid there's this Category 5 devastation, it doesn't help you to get a paper check if the banks are closed so we look at what is the best way to plan those resources out. But we do have various ways that we can do it. In a Category 5, it's very likely that there is going to be interruption to services, including your ability to get pay. It may be a couple days late or a couple days early, but it won't be like clockwork, very likely, because you have to plan for those other moving parts. But we do have different ways of getting it out, and we work very closely. HR and finance work very closely on coordinating how that's going to work. And we would all be informed at the executive level and at the elected official level of what's going on, so that if you get any questions directly, you have those answers as well.
Excellent. It would be my hope that we would do that in a proactive manner, meaning if it looked like they would be paid early or late, I'm hopeful that we would look at paying them early, because some people are just making it from paycheck to paycheck. So, and in an emergency, there are additional costs that they have that they don't anticipate.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, Commissioner Warren. You know, we always try to make the decision that's in the best interest of our employees, you know, understanding the financial impact, you know, if they were to not be able to get a paycheck, or if we know that during a payroll cycle, you know, we're going to be shut down, and based on what the report is in terms of the storm, how long that's going to be, and then we communicate out to the employees so that they will know what to expect. We try to keep them in the loop and being informed of what they can expect in terms of their pay.
Would that information be by this hotline as well? Or is that just for emergency personnel? How would we communicate with staff?
Now, go ahead, Jose, because, yeah, we've normally done it through the email system. I don't recall, and then I've not been through a lot of storm events in the last 2 years, and I hope that continues here, that we've done it through the emergency hotline in terms of payroll, but
Yeah, we normally communicate the basic, most important information that you need to know through the emergency channels, whether it's the hotline or the reverse 911 system. If you're going to get into a very granular level of detail, like, you know, how do you enter time or how do you cash your paycheck, we would rely on the phone trees of each department. So each department's phone tree would get activated, and each manager would call their immediate reports and tell them this is how you're going to collect your paycheck, or how you're going to record your time, or, you know, whatever instructions need to be given. So there's different alternates. If it rises to the level that it's an emergency communication that just needs to get out, those are the ways that we do it. And obviously, if it's something like building closures, telling employees not to report to work, in addition to the reverse 911, in addition to the emergency hotline, we share that with the media, so that the media always says, you know, City of West Palm Beach is closed, employees, you know, are told not to report. So we get that information that way as well.
Do we still pay employees if the buildings are shut down and due to an emergency and they're not able to come in to work? How do we?
We absolutely pay them. Yes. Yeah. If the city is closed during a work week, you know, for whatever reason, where they normally would be working and getting paid, they get paid. Now, if they have to then come in during the time that we get that we are closed due to the emergency declaration, then they get time and a half or double time. So they are compensated just in general. We don't want to not pay them because they are not able to come into work due to, you know, circumstances beyond their control. So they definitely get paid.
Thank you. I think that this has been such an incredible and timely presentation, and I think we can all be really confident that we're in good hands should we need your services on these emergency situations. I was curious, you mentioned in one of the earliest slides talking about the threat assessments that you've been doing over the years and the risks that we're looking at. If we had a hurricane coming straight at us this week, is there a certain place where you feel like our biggest threat, that's keeping you up at night? Is it our seawall? Is it something else that we should be really most concerned about in terms of any other storms that might be coming this year?
So depending on the category of storm, and I'll just kind of, go back to, over the last 25 years, the things that I've seen, we went through the 04 and 05 storms. I've been deployed to storms. We had, Irma and the other storms here. It's always about the people that are trapped. That's the one thing that always worries me, because you can't predict that. You can't predict a building collapse. You can't predict, Surfside's a perfect example. You can't predict that. You can't predict that with storms. So, when we send out our USAR teams, it's always like you're clinching, waiting back for answers. And it's 72 hours at least. You're out there digging through piles. So, yeah, if that's one thing, yeah, that's it. That's the one thing.
But Commissioner, I think one thing we can have some solace in is in the area that we are in. We are in a little bit higher elevation than some other parts of South Florida, and we also have the island as a buffer, the intercoastal. So the biggest danger always in a hurricane, and Brent knows this, is a storm surge. And although storm surge will be dangerous for folks who potentially ride on Flagler, it's not as big of an issue as some other parts of Florida. So we have a little bit of a buffer that other areas don't have. But the wind is a whole other issue.
Yeah, that's we had and forgive me, I can't remember which storm it was in 04 and 05. It was one of those storms, Wilma, one of them, or Gene, I think it was Gene. We actually had some collapses out off 45th Street, and we had to go get people. And actually, during Irma, my head's running through all the scenarios. In Irma, we actually had a tree fall in the south end, and we had tropical storm force winds. We actually sent out the Bearcat and a ladder truck and got 9 people out of that house. So those are the things, like the unknowns. Those kind of unknowns are what worries me. I think when it comes to, we're getting a lot better at predicting storm surge. We're getting a lot better at predicting flooding. We're getting a lot better at moving people out of their evacuation zones, A and B and C. We're getting a lot better at that. It's number one. It's like up at Michael. The people that stayed on Mexico Beach were the ones that died, and it was because it collapsed. So,
if I could just add a footnote, and I'm looking at it perhaps from a different vantage point than Chief Bloomfield, but the thing that worries me and keeps me up at night when we go into an activation, and this is from having done the 04, 05 hurricanes in St. Lucie and the experience there, and then certainly from being in activation when I was there at the county, is that after the storm passes, where people have been shut up, and you tell them to stay inside and they go out, you tend to have, or you have a great potential where people lose their lives because you got electrical lines down, in the water, and they, want to get out, understandably, or you got debris out in the street. You may have the red lights out, and the intersections then operate as 4-way stop signs, and you may invariably have someone who is not aware of that or doesn't observe it, and so you just have so much potential for individuals to lose their lives after the storm has passed, if they don't observe, the heat to stay inside until you give the all clear. And I've seen just tragic situations where, unfortunately, we had individuals to lose lives for those various reasons. And those are the kinds of things that keep me up at night when we start talking about, activation and a storm passing, because it's just so much potential for loss of life.
Look at Hurricane Andrew. I believe nearly half the people that died in that storm, that wasn't a big event in terms of deaths, but were after the storm.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Where are big shelters in the city?
So the county runs shelters. They're the ones that run the shelters. We have one at Forest Hill High School, and then there's a backup, and it just depends on which way the storm is coming and what we're dependent on. So it could be Palm Beach Lakes High School, it could be Berkshire, it could be one of the elementary schools. It just depends on what the county wants to open. But our initial one is for Forest Hill. There's actually initially 9 that open countywide, and then they add as they need to, depending on severity of the storm. But Forest Hill is our biggest and the number one that we use.
Commissioner Peduzzi, did you have a question?
I did, but it might have been answered because I can't remember the question. That's okay.
Sorry. Commissioner Peduzzi. Any additional questions? Well, thank you so much. That was really timely and a great conversation, and hopefully we never need to use any of this information, but
I agree.
I appreciate it. And I don't know if there's any other, I have no comments. Are there any other comments for the good of this body? Then we will call this meeting at 10:53. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.